What is up, guys? My name is Matt from Magic the Greatening, and today I got a really cool budget deck tech for you. It's the Mono Blue Mill. It's basically your just standard mono blue mill list. You got a few different things. Before we get into it, go ahead, hit that like button. Helps out a lot. Subscribe if you are new. Help me get to 3,000 subscribers. We just recently hit 2,000, so help me get to that 3,000 milestone. And go ahead, top eye icon, right-hand corner, vote for next video's deck tech that will come out on Tuesday. So go ahead and vote for that. 5 choices. I try to throw in some competitive decks in there, try to throw in some budget decks, because I know some of you like the competitive, like expensive ones. I know some of you love the budget ones, so try to have a mix of both in there. Go ahead, vote for which one you want to see next. Let's get into the video. Let's start off with the creatures and the enchantments first. We're going to be playing 3 copies of Manic Scribe, 3 copies of Minister of Inquiries, and 4 copies of Fraying Sanity. So let's go over the creatures first, because Fraying Sanity is the reason we made this deck. I'm sure all of you know what Fraying Sanity is. We'll talk about it, but Manic Scribe does rotate out. A lot of this deck and the important parts of this deck actually rotate out. I'm going to have to give you a fair warning right now. It's definitely not rotation proof. I know some of you will be upset by that, but I had a few of you asking for this list, and it was voted upon. So Manic Scribe enters. You mill your opponent for 3. That's decent. It's a good blocker early. Can block things like Earthshaker Kenra, 1-drops, stuff like that. You know, good stuff like that. And then it says Delirium, which we can actually get Delirium in this deck. We're playing creatures, instant sorceries, enchantments, lands. There's 5 different things. We're not playing Evolving Wilds, but we're playing deserts that sack to themselves, and I guess if you somehow get a Fraying Sanity in the graveyard. But anyway, Manic Scribe, if you have Delirium, mills your opponent 3 at their upkeep, which can be useful, but it's just a good early game blocker. Mills for 3 when it enters. Minister is a card that's being seen a lot of play lately. Mostly in the blue-white Godpharaoh's Gifts decks, but it works all the same here in this deck. When it enters, you get 2 energy, you tap it, pay an energy, and you target opponent or target player mills 3. So definitely going to be your opponent. We're playing Glimmer in here for more energy. We're not playing any Ether Hub, so that's not going to be an energy producer for us. We actually want as many islands as we can get, because we are playing Engulf the Shore, but Minister is kind of a no-brainer. I do need to address here, before we talk about Fraying Sanity, about the lack, or the, only playing 6 creatures. Most people don't want to play creatures in this deck, because it turns your opponent's removal cards into just dead draws, which can be useful, but I feel like we need the creatures. The Manic Scribe that can block 2 or 1 power things can be really, really useful, especially against those mono-red decks. We're not going to really want to block with our 1-2 Minister of Inquiries, because it mostly dies to everything that's on a 1-1. So, but the Manic Scribe really helps. Minister, if they don't deal with it, can mill your opponent for 6. You play Glimmer, can mill like 9 or 12, which is more than enough on a 1-drop. So definitely worth 3 of them there. I was originally playing a playset, but it wasn't worth it. And now, talking about Fraying Sanity, this is the card that makes this deck. If you can get 1 of these out, or even 2, this deck really goes off. Fraying Sanity reads, you enchant a player. At the beginning of each end step, enchanted player puts the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, where X is the number of cards put into the graveyard from anywhere this turn. This applies to every turn. So if they cast a spell, it resolves, goes into their graveyard, that counts on their turn. So actually, if they play like 2 like non-creature spells or whatever, and they go to the graveyard, they'll have to mill 2 at the end of their turn. This also basically just doubles our mill spells, like Startled Awake and Compelling Argument and stuff like that. We'll go over those here in a bit, but basically doubles. Now I need to explain, if you have 2 Fraying Sanities out, how does that work? Okay, how much do they mill? And it's actually really good for us if you have 2 of these things out. So let's say you have 2 Fraying Sanities out, and you hit them with a Compelling Argument, which mills for 5. Okay, on end step, the first Fraying Sanity, both don't trigger at the same time. The first one goes off, and they mill 5 more, because they put 5, they mill 5. Then, after that trigger resolves, the second Fraying Sanity trigger goes off, and it counts the ones that your other Fraying Sanity, just put it so it'll mill 10. So it basically triples or quadruples. Whenever you have 2 out, it'll count the other Fraying Sanity. So if you have 2 Fraying Sanities and you play a Startled Awake, the Startled Awake mills 13. The first Fraying Sanity mills 13, so that's 26 cards total. Then the second Fraying Sanity mills 26. You just milled 52 cards with 2 Fraying Sanities and a Startled Awake. That literally ends the game. Because in order to play all those 3 things, it'll have to be at least turn 5. So that literally wins the game, and they'll have drawn at least 12 cards out of a 60-card deck. They'll have 48 cards in their library at least, or at the minimum, and you'll mill 52 and win the game. So needed to point that out there because a lot of people are confused on having multiple Fraying Sanity. And if you have 3 out, it'll count, it does the same thing. Each Fraying Sanity will count the last one. So need to explain that. Let's move on. Now let's talk about the actual mill cards in the deck. Yeah, our creatures mill stuff and Fraying Sanity helps us mill stuff, but we need actual mill spells. So we're going to be playing 4 copies of Startled Awake, 4 copies of Compelling Argument, and 3 copies of Winds of Rebuke. Okay, Winds of Rebuke isn't technically quote-unquote a mill spell, but it bounces a non-land permanent, and each of us mill 2. Now, milling us can be important because it could give us Delirium for Manic Scribe. It's not like a huge thing or a huge reason to play Winds of Rebuke. It's just a good, bounce spell that helps mill too. But if we can get Delirium on and get a Manic Scribe can start doing some serious work for us. But the big mill spell here is Startled Awake. Now this actually rotates out, and it's really expensive for some reason right now. Maybe it's big in Modern. I don't know. I don't follow mill and Modern that much, but right now it's like $25 for the playset. Something stupidly ridiculous. Obviously, it's going to play outside of Standard, but for 4 mana, sorcery speed, target opponent puts the top 13 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. You have a Fraying Sanity out. That's basically 26 cards, almost half the deck. Pretty strong. The activated ability is it has to be in your graveyard, so either after you play it or you mill yourself with the Winds of Rebuke and this goes in or anything like that. You pay 5, you put Startled Awake from your graveyard onto the battlefield transformed. Basically, you just have to do combat damage with that transformed guy. It comes back to your hand as Startled Awake, and you can just keep playing it again. It's an okay way of doing it, but it's not the best. Usually, we just want the original 4 mana spell. I'd just rather draw into another one or something. And then Compelling Argument for 2 mana at sorcery speed. Someone mills for 5. Also can cycle out for 1. We're not playing Abandoned Sarcophagus, which is a card I see a lot of people playing these mill decks, so they can replay Compelling Argument and then main deck Censor and stuff like that. But we're not doing that here. We just want to hard cast this and mill 5, hopefully with a Fraying Sanity out. So Compelling Argument can help do that. Nothing else much to say about these mill cards. Let's move to our other stuff. Okay, actually, before we move on, I need to explain the little interaction with Startled Awake and some of our bounce spells, like Winds of Rebuke. So when you obviously can play Startled Awake for its 4 mana, but the 5 mana thing, it comes back onto the battlefield as a stupid 1/1. You could do combat damage with it. It's got Skulk, which makes it kind of easy. Not easy against mono red, but can make it easy against mid-range or control decks. But anyway, another little trick you could do with this is, since we're playing so many bounce spells in this deck, and we'll go over that here in a second, you can just bounce it back to your hand with an Engulf the Shore or something like that. And it comes back to your hand, and whenever a transform card leaves the battlefield, it's on the other side, not the front side of the card, if it goes to a graveyard or something like that, or back to your hand, you're supposed to put it back to the front of the card. So if you bounce your transformed Startled Awake back to your hand, it'll come back as a Startled Awake. It won't be the transformed card. So that's a neat little interaction. Thought I should point it out. And it's kind of a perfect segue into our bounce spells. So we're going to be playing 3 copies of Engulf the Shore and 3 copies of Unsummon. Those are our bounce spells, including Winds of Rebuke. You already discussed that. Don't need to go over it again. But Engulf the Shore is a super important card in this deck. We're playing the 4th one in the sideboard. Just so strong. It's not that good, though, against the mono-red deck, as I figured out. Yeah, you can bounce things back to their hand, like a Glorybringer or a Hazoret or something like that, but a lot of their creatures have haste, and we're kind of just doing them a justice, because they'll just play them again. They have haste, we just wasted 4 mana, so only wanted to play the 3. This deck does have problems with the mono red deck. Haste creatures are our worst nightmare. Do keep that in mind. We kind of just have to counter them. That's our only option against the mono red deck, which is why this deck it's good against like mid-range decks and other control decks, but against mono red aggro in specific, it does very poorly because all their creatures have haste, or most of them do. And anyway, we got to play bounce spells though, and for our other matchups, Engulf the Shore is perfect for that. It rotates, I know, it's just the perfect card, and it's at instant speed. And then Unsummon is a 1 mana. Return it back to their hand. Can be good against mono red for 1 mana. Doesn't feel like we're wasting too much. You know, you bounce like a Hazoret back to their hand, we're looking pretty sweet. But those are our bounce spells. Let's move on. Alright, let's talk about our last 3 non-creature spells, or actually just regular spells in the deck. We're going to be playing 2 copies of Essence Scatter, 3 copies of Negate, and 4 copies of Glimmer of Genius. We're playing a ton more Counterspells in the sideboard, but I felt like we needed some main board ones. Bounce spells aren't just going to do it. We do need to counter stuff. Negate is in there because we specifically don't like Planeswalkers. Those are pretty brutal against us. Also, don't want them resolving like things that could shuffle their graveyard back into their hand, like Commit to Memories or anything like that. So Negates are in there for that. Essence Scatter, important 2-mana counter spells, keep things off the board early. And then the Glimmer of Genius, it's because we're a mono blue list, need some card draw. This gives us energy for Minister of Inquiries, can dig for some cards, scry 2, then draw. You guys know how good Glimmer of Genius is. Don't think I need to explain this more. Let's move to the lands. Let's quickly just run past the lands here. We're going to be playing 4 copies of Desert the Mindful, 4 Ipnu Rivulet, and 16 Island, for a total of 28 for lands. We could get a little bit more spicier with our lands, like play Scavenger Grounds and stuff like that, but we do need a fair amount of islands for our Engulf the Shores. I try to keep that in mind. Desert the Mindful and Ipnu Rivulet, though, do fit pretty well in the deck, despite them not being islands. Desert can cycle out for 2 mana, and Ipnu basically can sack our other deserts, like our Desert of the Mindfuls, and mill 4, which is kind of like the extra reach that we could really use in our land. So mill in the land, pretty good. Nothing else to say here. Let's move to the sideboard. Alright, our sideboard consists of 3 copies of Cancel for counter spells. Kind of need that. 2 Confiscation Coup. We have a slight energy theme running through the deck. This can take problematic cards that our opponent is playing, mostly against mid-range decks. 3 Crook of Condemnation. Wouldn't be caught without this card in our sideboard. We're milling. We need some graveyard hate. So if we're playing against like Green-Black Delirium, Godfrey's Gift deck, Animator decks, anything of that sort, Crook of Condemnation can come in and just exile their graveyard for good. 1 more Engulf the Shore, like I said, there would be an extra copy of. 2 more Essence Scatters against that mono red list, mono red deck. Essence Scatters, just countering our opponent's thing can be very good. One more little thing about Crook of Condemnation. I know I just skipped over that pretty quickly, but it's very important that we can exile Eternalized cards like Earthshaker Kenra, so you might actually want to even bring it in against like the mono red list. I know it's slow, but if we can get past that early push from mono red, Crook can make sure they can't eternalize anything, so that can be very useful. 3 Gale Strike, very good against mid-range decks. Draws us cards, returns a target creature to their hand. Very, very strong, especially if they're playing like a Glorybringer on turn 5 or something with haste that's super big, just like that. Just returning it to their hand can be really, really useful. Or decks that try to like ramp into Ulamog. This can be pretty good. I know it exiles the top 20, but Gale Strike can be good for that. And then 1 more Winds of Rebuke if you're playing against like Planeswalkers or anything like that. Winds of Rebuke, returning non-land permits, can be very important. That is it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, hit that like button, helps out a lot. Subscribe if you are new, or if you've seen my other content and you decided you liked it, go ahead and subscribe. And again, click the top eye icon to vote for next video's Deck Tech 5 brand new choices. We got a whole bunch of like competitive, expensive decks. We got some more budget decks. A little mix of both. I know a lot of people like the competitive decks. I know a lot of people like the budget. So this time I tried to make a little nice combination for you guys. So go ahead and vote, and I hopefully will see you in that next video.